One of the things I've been doing while I've been out of school is picking up on the beach oysters that wash up. And I've been putting those oysters into an oyster cage, or an oyster float is what some people call it. And I'm reaching down and I'm seeing lots of them, and they're heavy. Because here they are. Let's see if I can get them to come out. And there they are. They're floating in the creek. So they're still alive and they're still in their shells. Some of them are big and some of them are medium size. And they float in here and they can still eat all the little plankton and all the algae and impurities in the water that oysters like to eat. And then one day around Thanksgiving, we will have maybe an oyster scald or something. But those are just oysters I picked up that washed up on the beach in the different days when the water was very churned up and the waves were big, and it washes them up. And there they all are, just floating in there, getting bigger. Water is rough like this. Sometimes it churns up the bottom of the river and it causes oysters, live oysters, to wash up on the beach. And so what Mrs. P does is she collects those oysters and she puts them into the oyster floats so we can eat them later.
Where do these oysters come from? Well, out in the river there are oyster beds, sometimes called oyster reefs. There are not as many as there used to be because of overfishing, pollution, and destruction of their natural habitat. Environmental groups and oyster growers have been adding little oysters to the river. I have seen large flat ships called barges covered with huge piles of empty oyster shells that have tiny baby oysters called spat, S-P-A-T, connected to them. The crew on the boat washes these shells with big hoses right into the river so that they will grow and form into oyster reefs. I have some YouTube video that I'm going to insert into this video. It's made by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. It's going to explain the life cycle of the eastern oyster. Here you see the oysters producing eggs by shooting them into the water as tiny, microscopic, very little eggs, which then grow into larvae that must find a nice shell or rock on which to attach themselves.
And in no time, a brood of baby oysters begins life drifting on the tide. The larvae quickly develop organs, a protective shell, even a crude ability to move up and down. As they meander above the bottom, sometimes for miles, the larvae sense a chemical that oyster reefs emit. That's their signal to settle down. After just a couple of weeks or so of freedom, the lucky ones find, attach to, and start growing right on another oyster shell, stuck together for better or worse, for life. And that's how wild oysters make an oyster reef, oyster upon oyster, year after year, from the bottom up. An oyster reef, with its clean, hard surfaces and intricate three-dimensional structure, attracts a wide variety of life. There seems to be life, and the struggle for life, everywhere. Some 300 species of plants and animals depend on the reef, and one another, in an intricate web of life. But when it comes to sheer filtering power, the mighty oyster has no match. Mature and healthy, a single oyster can pump 50 gallons a day through its gills, removing not only algae, but sediment as well. As the first colonists arrived, oysters were so abundant, it's estimated they could filter a volume of water equal to the entire bay in just a few days. Without steps to save wild oysters, the entire Chesapeake region risks the permanent loss of not only the bay's iconic shellfish, but also a healthy bay, a healthy economy, and a healthy way of life.
Here, it's almost sunset. It's really beautiful. And it's April 3rd. It's in the evening. It's after 7 o'clock. But I've been looking for the oysters and they're empty, the ones I'm finding. But look what I found. That's sea glass. In my family, we used to call it wishing glass. And what we would do was we would find it on the beach, we'd throw it in the water and make a wish. But now I save it and keep it for my collection. I'm going to keep looking, see if I can find any oysters that got washed up in the rough water yesterday. Yes, I found these on the beach. Looks like one might be a box, but the other is a good oyster. And a box means empty, but these washed up yesterday in the storm. You see. Yep, looks good. And I drew a circle around it so it'll be there. I can see it easily when I come back up the beach. Another one. And so that's two here.
Mrs. P, that was very poor planning. You were enjoying getting the oysters so much that you forgot that the tide was coming in. There goes the purple bucket and the crab net. You're going to have to take off your shoes because you have no boots on and retrieve them. Oh, the water's so cold. Oh, I hope that there's a beautiful sunset because I sure do need something to cheer me up.
The sun is just setting on Friday, April 3rd, 2020. And I hope you all have a beautiful weekend.